Okay, I'm back. Hey guys, it's ggDoA. Just doing a new video. Like I said, the end of the last one, I wanted to split this up because it was getting kind of long. So that was a class card video. This is going to be the neutral minion video. It's going to be a little bit shorter, but there's enough neutral minions that have come out, been announced rather, since the last Whispers of the Old Gods video I did. I wanted to do a separate video for that. So thanks for watching the last one. Thanks for watching this one. And this will just be kind of my first impressions, my kind of gut reactions to these sort of cards. And let's start with Faceless Shambler. 4 mana for a 1/1. Taunt, Battle Cry, copy a friendly minion's attack and health. So the idea is that theoretically you'd get a big taunt for 4 mana. It's I don't know. It's an interesting card because you could get something decent out of it. It's definitely a card that you'd have to play around what's on the board with. You'd have to play around what's in your deck with. I don't know. I just don't know about this card because you get the friendly minion's attack and health, obviously, so you could theoretically get another big body on the board. But going into the 4 mana turn, are you really going to have something on the board that's worth getting a taunt out of for 4 mana? Maybe yes, maybe no. My first reaction to this card is not that great. In something like a slower control deck, where you're going to get bigger minions out later on the game, and then you play this later in the game as sort of a late game way to get a big minion for cheap. Like in something like, I don't know, just an example, Taunt Druid. If you copy an Ancient of War with this, it's really good. But if you're trying to use this as like a tempo play, I think it's going to be a little bit tougher to make that happen. So we'll see how it gets used. Might see a little bit of play in control decks, but I don't really see it as a faster card. I see it as a later game slow card. So we'll see. Oh, there we go. Aha. 6 mana for a 7/6. It's the Scarum Cultist. Battlecry, give your Cthulhu +2/+2 wherever it is. So another Cthulhu card. We've talked about a lot of these already in the set. This is a good one, I think, because it's a neutral minion that actually has better stats than the mana at 7/6 for 6. And so it's going to be something that your opponent needs to deal with. It also buffs your Cthulhu. Unfortunately, it's also at 7 attacks, so if BGH stays the same, it might get just immediately eliminated. But in a deck where you're going to be playing Cthulhu anyway, your opponent's going to maybe be a little bit worried about playing BGH against something like this and might have to try to find other ways to deal with this bigger body. So again, you know, the idea of Cthulhu decks is to survive, essentially. To survive playing weaker stuff on the board to buff that really strong Cthulhu-centric late game. This guy is it's a good minion for this. It's good stats for the mana, but again, you know, it's a little bit risky because you're not really doing anything right away to the board by playing this minion. But, you know, overall seems decent. We'll see if it gets a fit in. It seems like a little bit expensive. The 6 mana slot is a pretty highly contested slot in every deck, and I think that includes Cthulhu decks. So, don't know if this guy's going to see a lot of use, but as far as the Cthulhu theme goes, I think he fits. I think it's fine. Moving on, Scaled Nightmare, another dragon card. 6 mana for a 2/8. At the start of your turn, double this minion's attack. So obviously it starts out life as a 2/8, next turn becomes a 4/8, then an 8/8. So it can get out of control pretty quick, and it's one of those cards in the 6 mana slot that is like Sylvanas, like Emperor Thaurissan. It's one of those cards that when it comes out, you feel very compelled to deal with it right away. Now, some classes have an easier way to deal with this than others. Obviously, Priest can just steal this with Cabal Shadow Priest, and then you're in big trouble. Paladin can use something to nerf the attack. They can use like Eldar Peacekeeper, even though that wouldn't permanently set the attack to 1. Next turn it would go 2, 4, 6, you know, and so on and so on. So it'd be a temporary thing. But it's a hard minion to remove, but it's an easy minion for some classes to mitigate. I think 6 mana is reasonable for what this card does. I think it's going to be good against some classes, not so good against other ones. In a dragon deck, depending on the class, I'd probably give it a try, because Another thing to consider too is that, maybe you could include this in a priest deck that works off of inner fire, something like that. You use your priest cards to double the minion's health, and then you use inner fire to make the attack equal to that, so you can just end up getting massive creatures this way, or massive damage this way with the scaled nightmare. So there's going to be interesting ways you can use it. I think it's going to at least be a card that your opponent needs to drop what they're doing and handle when you play it, which is always good in Hearthstone. You always want to be playing stuff that essentially lets you take control of the priority back again. You play this card, then suddenly they are reacting to you instead of you having to react to them. So I like the concept of it. I think it's, again, risky card against certain classes, of course, but the idea is cool. So we'll see if it ends up in some dragon decks. Moving on, N'Zoth the Corruptor, another one of the old gods. 10 for a 5/7. So the stats are much cheaper than the mana. But Battlecry, summon your death rattle minions that died this game. That could be really, really strong, if you think about it. Because obviously there's a lot of great death rattle minions out there. A lot of good core stuff. Again, Sylvanas immediately jumps to mind when you think of good death rattle minions. But it's just going to be a way to fill your board with big scary stuff that is hard to get rid of, like a late game control-oriented deck that runs something like Sylvanas, Sneeds, even something like Karen Bloodhoof is going to be really, really benefited by this type of card, by N'Zoth, because you're going to bring all that stuff back that's already hard to get rid of, and then you're going to have a 5/7 body as well with this. So it's kind of one of those late game win it sort of cards, maybe sort of a win more kind of card. If you excuse me, wow, I've still got a little bit of a cough, I apologize. If you're playing this guy, you may already be in a pretty good state to win it, but we'll see. I mean, any late game situation where you can just summon a lot of minions is good, so I think it's certainly going to be used. I think it's a good card. Moving on, 6 mana for 4/6 Ancient Harbinger. At the start of your turn, put a 10-cost minion from your deck into your hand. So this is a way for you to grab Cthulhu out of your deck, grab N'Zoth out of your deck, grab, Deathwing out of your deck. So it's a way to set up more consistently for that late game. So I think in a Cthulhu deck, you're definitely going to be running these guys. I think it's not the greatest stats for the mana, but again, it's about you preparing yourself for that big 10 mana turn, for that big late game thing. And where we've seen from decks like the Anything Can Happen Murloc Paladin deck, there's ways to build decks where you can set up for things that happen on turn 10. There kind of always have been. So I think this is a card that's going to see some use in a lot of old god-centric decks. And I mean, we could see control-oriented decks that focus around having all the old gods. So it'd be really cool for this guy to sort of be an engine to generate the situation where you have those cards ready to play on turn 10. Pretty cool stuff, so I like it. 8 mana for 6/7, the Boogie Monster. When this attacks and kills a minion, gain +2/+2. So, I mean, 8 mana for a 6/7, stats aren't great. Yeah, theoretically jumps up to like an 8/9 if he kills something, but I mean, if you look at this guy and you look at Gruul, you're already going to be getting, roughly better stats for the mana, and you don't need to kill anything to do it. This guy isn't vulnerable when you play him to Big Game Hunter, so he's got that going for him. But I don't know. I think it's an interesting gimmick, but I just don't think it's a big enough threat that people are going to want to put it in their decks per se. Because again, at a late game turn like this, when you're spending 8 mana on a minion, you want it to do something right now. You want it to be like Ragnaros or something, right? So the fact that this guy comes out, he's already weaker than the 8 costs that you see from other minions. You have to attack into something and kill him to buff it up. Who knows how much damage he's going to take from whatever minion he kills. Obviously, it's going to be 2 less because he gets 2 more health. But it just kind of seems a little bit lackluster. I'm not too excited about this one. Moving on. Blood of the Ancient One. 9 for a 9/9. If you control 2 of these at the end of your turn, merge them into the Ancient One. I believe I have... There we go. The Ancient One is next. So put 2 of these guys out. If they live, they, let's see, at the end of your turn, they turn to the Ancient One, which is a 30/30. So basically, going into your opponent's turn, they're going to be staring down this guy, which is a 30/30. And if they don't have a way to deal with him, obviously, he's going to crush him, right? He's got 30 attack, 30 health. Now, BGH stops this guy cold, also stops this guy cold. So this card, it's kind of gimmicky, right? You know? So, yeah, I mean, you could theoretically pair this with, like, the Rogue card that makes you have a 1/1 copy of a card like that for 1 mana, because you could essentially get 2 of these guys down that way. You could, but then you would have to have, you know, again, this guy survive a turn, so, I don't know. It's a cool idea. Getting a 30/30 out is neat, but it just seems like it'd be really, really hard to make this happen and then make this guy survive to the next turn, you know? So probably not something we're going to see in competitive per se, but it's interesting at least. I like the concept of it again, and as time goes on, you know, maybe there's going to be cards that enable this sort of thing, but initially it's neat. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be played competitively. But seeing a 30/30 is neat. Moving on, 6 mana for a 5/5, another one of those great 6 mana cards. Battle Cry, add 2 bananas to your hand. So, Mukla, Tyrant of the Veil. And so this guy gives you the opportunity to buff your minions. It gives you the opportunity to cast cheap spells that will benefit from the other cards that benefit you by casting cheap spells, you know, something like Flame Waker, all that kind of stuff. And we don't know if it's bananas. I don't know if it's been confirmed or not. If it is, I apologize. But I don't know yet if it's bananas as in the 1/1 banana that King Mukla gives you, or if it's bananas from the Banana Tavern Brawl, where these bananas can be different spells that do different things. And that obviously changes, you know, if this card is great or not. Again, whenever you see a 6 mana card, it's going to be a card that's really hard to fit into your deck because there's already a lot of great 6 mana cards out there. 6 mana seems to be kind of the sweet spot for 5/5s. So is Mukla, Tyrant of the Veil good enough to occupy one of those 6 mana spots in your deck? Probably not. Probably not. But it depends on the kind of deck you're making. Maybe you want to include this guy because he's got a way to buff stuff on the board. But I think this guy is one of those cards that's almost good enough, but just not quite good enough to bump some of the other 6 mana cards that we've taken a look at out of that slot in your deck. So, something to kind of think about. Moving on, Tentacle of N'Zoth. 1 for a 1/1, Death Rattle, deal 1 damage to all minions. So, yeah, just a good little board control card early on. A good way to have a way to deal with some of those really early game minions and something like Face Hunter and some of the stuff that Warlock has, you know, Paladin. Just a way to get that very, very early turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 board control, pop some Divine Shields. So, yeah, it's definitely a card that in certain decks could see some youth, or use rather, not youth, I don't know how old. The Tentacle's probably old because it's an old god, right? So nothing youthful there. But it could see some use in some decks that just want to stay even in the early game, right? So, yeah, could probably see it put a few decks. Yasharaj, Rage Unbound, 10 for a 10/10. At the end of your turn, put a minion from your deck into the battlefield. So, okay, it's a 10 for a 10/10, and essentially you get another minion from your deck onto the battlefield. I'd be a little bit nervous playing this guy with all my other old gods because a lot of the old gods rely on having very good battle cries. Cthulhu, though, I suppose if you get Cthulhu out of this, he doesn't do the battle cry damage, but he would still be buffed from the other cards, right? I don't think he'd lose any of those buffs from being played with this. So it could be a way to just get some massive minions out on the board. Could be a way to, like, you know, obviously getting free minions is nice, but you're always worried about not getting to use that battle cry. So as out of the old gods I've seen, this guy is probably the least appealing, I think, to put in your deck, because any big minion, again, is mitigatable by BGH. If you're using your entire late game 10 mana turn to do it, you better get a lot of good stuff out of this. And you're just not guaranteed to get great stuff out of Yasharaj, Rage Unbound. So I'd be a little bit hesitant about playing him. I'll probably try him out, but I think out of the late game old god cards that are going to going to get cut first from lists that focus around old gods, this guy's going to be the first one to go. Moving on, Spawn of N'Zoth, the adorable little tentacled minion. 3 for a 2/2, Death Rattle, give your minions +1/+1. That's a pretty powerful effect, isn't it? For early game minion, something like this in a Zoo Warlock could be pretty strong because it's something your opponent needs to consider. It suddenly makes it a lot harder for your opponent to decide the right way to trade with your minions to do things like board clears, because that +1/+1 could end up making a pretty big difference. So I think it's a cool card. I like cards like this that make your opponent have to really think about how they play their turns differently. 2/2 for 3 mana isn't the most exciting stats ever, obviously, but for the effect it gives you, I think it's worth trying out anyway. I could see it be a card that gets cut fairly early on, but it's something that's worth a try. Could be very strong. Moving on, 5 for a 4/4, Cult Apothecary. Battle cry, for each enemy minion, restore 2 health to your hero. So this could be kind of a replacement for Antique Healbot, right? This is the kind of card where if you're dealing with a big board, you get a 4/4 out, which is nice, and you also get substantially a pretty big heal, a maximum of up to 14 healing if they have a full board. More likely it's going to be 2, 3 minions, 4 minions. You're looking at maybe a maximum of 6 to 8 health most of the time. But it's a swing card, right? It's a card that gets you a decent body, gets you a little bit of board control back, and heals your hero so that you have more kind of room to deal with what your opponent has out on their side. So yeah, I think it's a card that could certainly see some use. On paper, it looks like it could be a good effect. It's again dependent on what your opponent has out. But in a situation, in a meta, where there might be a lot of mid-rangey sort of decks or aggressive decks, it's a good way to sort of swing things back health-wise in your favor long enough to handle what's out on the board, theoretically. So, could get some use, but it's going to be kind of a meta-dependent card. It's going to be dependent on what other people are playing that makes you decide whether or not you want to use this. Cho'Gall, whoops, it's a Warlock card. Messed it up. I accidentally had this marked as neutral. 7 for a 7/7, we'll check it out anyway. Warlock Legendary, Cho'Gall, Battle Cry. The next spell you cast this turn costs health instead of mana. So when you play it, you get to basically cast a lot of... excuse me. You could cast a very powerful spell for health instead of mana. And I like the concept of this. I'm trying to think of like, what Warlock spells you might want to cast that are like big and expensive. That would be good with this. The most expensive Warlock spells are like Doom or Twisting Nether, which would also kill Cho'Gall, so that's not great. It's in that 7 for 7 spot, which is okay. But it's really going to depend on what spell you can kind of use. Siphon Soul would be good, because you could get, you'd pay 6 health, but you'd get 3 back, so essentially you'd be paying 3 to remove a minion, which is pretty good value overall. Yeah, paying 3 health to remove a minion, that's not bad. What other spells are there? There's some. So I think, again, this is a card that could see some use. 7 for a 7/7 is certainly appealing, even though he does die to BGH. So to make this guy work, you're really going to need to have a good spell in your hand to play with him. So I think he's right on the edge. Could work, could be kind of thrown by the wayside. We'll see what kind of decks pop out. Moving on to another old god. 10 for a 7/5, Yogg-Saron Hope's End. Battle Cry, cast a random spell for each spell you've cast this game. Targets chosen randomly. So this is a card that's just insane, obviously. It's going to be crazy whatever this card does, because you're playing it late game. Ideally, you've played a lot of spells throughout the game, and it's not tied to the cost of the spells you played or anything like that. It's just a random spell for each spell you've cast this game. So it could either, again, be really good, or it could be really bad. I've heard that if a spell is cast that kills Yogg-Saron, the rest of the effect still happens anyway. So you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. But certainly something that's going to be experimented with a lot. I'm sure there's a way to make this good. But it's, you know, and again, it's a random spell and a random target. Could be cast on you too. So I don't know. As far as old gods that I would cut from my old god deck, this guy would be another one that I probably cut pretty soon after making it. But we'll see. It might just be statistically good enough that that he'll be useful. But I'm not sure on the stats yet for that. 9 mana for 5/9, Sagoth the Slitherer. Taunt can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So, I mean, it's a big minion. It's a 5/9 taunt that can't be targeted by spells. But he costs 9 mana, so he's going to be coming really late in the game. And I'm not so sure that a 5/9 taunt that has that ability is going to be super useful. Cast so late in the game. This guy to me kind of falls in the same category as something like Malorn, where it's theoretically a great body on the board if you can get it out there, but it just doesn't make a big enough difference in late game situations compared to what we see other classes doing in the hyper late game, right? So we'll see. I just don't think he gives you enough immediate value to be really that great. It's a cool card, but I don't really think it's going to get a lot of competitive use anyway. I think in Arena, though, it could be very good. Moving on, a dragon, Deathwing Dragonlord. 10 mana for a 12/12. It's Deathwing stats. Death Rattle. Put all dragons from your hand into the battlefield. So this is going to be a little bit of a tough card to make work, I think, because you're going to be playing it so late, and in a dragon deck, you're going to need to be playing a lot of those dragons throughout the game to in order to stay alive and get that board control you want in order to win with the dragon deck. So I don't know. I don't know how great this guy's going to actually end up being. Obviously, it's a big body, and if you can put more minions on the battlefield, that's great. Again, the BGH disclaimer, Dice Big Game Hunter, of course. But it just, the main issue for me with this card is it just seems like it's going to be tough to play this guy along with a lot of dragons from your hand. And a lot of the dragons are Battlecry minions too, right? And you want that Battlecry to happen. You don't want your Dragon Consort coming out without making another dragon cheaper. You don't want your Twilight Guardian coming out without getting the Battlecry from having another dragon in your hand. So, you know, until we see some other dragons that are maybe just good bodies on the board that you could theoretically, now the cough's coming back, save in your hand, I think it's going to be tough to make this guy be really, really effective. There's so many big minions in this set that I wonder if we're going to see a change with BGH. I hope we do, because I hope we see situations where big minions can be viable and can be good again. But I just don't know if this guy is going to be the greatest. I think you're going to put him in a dragon deck. If you build a dragon deck, you might as well put him in. But as far as getting the big, huge turn that it looks like you're meant to with this card, it's probably not going to happen too much. It's going to be hard to make it work. And that's it. So moving back, that's the original card we looked at in the last video. So I guess that's it for the neutral minions. And that's everything as far as I know. All the cards that have come out since my last video. So thanks for watching, guys. If I missed anything, let me know. Comment on the YouTube video if you want to let me know what you think. Again, just my first impressions. Could be wrong, could be right. I just like talking about the cards. I hope you guys enjoy hearing me talk about the cards too. Either way, Whispers of the Old Gods is going to be a great set. It's going to change the game a lot in a positive way, I think. And I can't wait to play it. Can't wait to cast it. And can't wait to see what comes out next. So thanks for watching again, guys. Sub to my YouTube channel. Sub to everything. Go to Twitter. Follow me on there at ggDoA. That's it for me. Thanks for watching. See you next time.